distinguished scholars, artists, dear friends. It gives me immense pleasure to address all of you, especially for a 3-day festival on Mohiniyattam, which is a rare event in the whole Indian context. I haven't heard of Mohiniyattam festivals outside Kerala, except a few of those festivals conducted by Srimati Bharati Shivaji. History has not been very generous to certain art forms in India. To certain other art forms, it has been too generous. Unfortunately, Mohiniyattam is facing such a predicament. It's sandwiched between the classical dance drama of Kathakali and the high-density traditional Sanskrit theatre, Kudiyattam. No other state in India has this kind of a tricky situation. If you take Orissa, there is Odissi, but there is no other dance, classical dance or theatre tradition to compete with it. You go to Chennai, you have Bharatanatyam. There is no other classical dance tradition other than Bharatanatyam. Similarly, Kathak, Kuchipudi. But in this small tip of the southwest part of Indian subcontinent, there are at least 3 different high-density dance theatre traditions which are smothering Mohiniyattam. This unfortunate situation, history can be sometimes very cruel, and this actually created lots of confusion, identity crisis for this dance tradition. It begins right from its history onwards. I've always noticed whenever 6 Mohiniyattam dances come together, there will be 7 opinions. And all the Mohiniyattam dances, when they come together for a consensus in quotation, they all agree to disagree. It's primarily because any dance form, if it has to fall back upon a lineage, it should have a solid history, a proven history, with records, plaques, or temple documents, or other historical data available to prove its antiquity. Unfortunately, Mohiniyattam, except for its history of resurgence, when Mahakavi Vallathol Narayana Menon, who founded Kerala Kalamandalam, he was the one who actually went to the different parts of Kerala, especially in Palghat, Thrissur areas, to find out the surviving gurus of Mohiniyattam, so that this dance form doesn't become extinct. So, till the beginning of the 20th century, what was the historical status of Mohiniyattam? So many scholars have expressed their own opinions about the historical aspects of Mohiniyattam. A few persons have held that Mohiniyattam has a very direct relationship with Nangyar Gotham, the Sanskrit theatre tradition exclusive to the women of the Nambyas called the Nangyars, which are performed only in the Kothambalams, the traditional temple theatres. I wonder how much these scholars can establish the relationship between Nangyarkootu and Mohiniyattam. And there has been a widely held notion that Mohiniyattam has its inheritance from Dasiyattam, the Devadasi tradition of South India. I really doubt whether Mohiniyattam which we experience today, which poet Vallathol resurrected, whether it does have a connection with, a relationship with the Devadasi dancing tradition. If you go with the archival records in the Kerala State Archives, which is refer to the old records from the Cochin province of Travancore, you can see that Dasiyattam existed in certain temples of Kerala. In Kodungalur temple, there was this tradition of dancing by the Devadasis. In the Payanur temple of Cochin, there was a dancing tradition by the Devadasis. But these Devadasis, they had a kind of Konkan tradition. They all came through the coastal belt of Karnataka. They migrated to Kerala. And they did not find any shelter in North Malabar and North Kerala. So they further came down to the central Kerala, where the provincial king of Kochi offered them shelter. And they were granted the privilege to dance in a few temples. But the dance which they practiced in this temple as a worship to the gods or the goddesses, it does have nothing to do with the Mohiniyattam which has been performed over the century. So to relate this Devadasi dance tradition with Mohiniyattam to Mohiniyattam is rather ambiguous. So far there is no evidence to establish in terms of the movements, in terms of the themes used by the Devadasi dances and the Mohiniyattam that has been practiced, at least from the dawn of the 20th century. So this actually makes an assessment of Mohiniyattam history a huge, huge task. There is little wonder the Mohiniyattam dances of the day were highly individualistic. They differ in their perspectives on the history of this dance tradition. And to go with the obvious empirical experiences, perhaps the history of Mohiniyattam we can trace from the days of Vallathol, who founded Kerala Kalamandalam and who introduced Mohiniyattam as part of the curriculum of Kalamandalam way back in 1932 probably. And he underwent lots and lots of struggles to find a teacher for Mohiniyattam, because by that time there was a kind of involuntary ban on the dancing tradition, especially Mohiniyattam in Kerala. It was not banned in Kerala, especially in Kochi, although Dasiyattam was banned in 1925 in Travancore. But then most of these Mohiniyattam dances, they withdrew from the scene. There was a sort of a taboo in existence. And because of the so-called Victorian morality, these dances, because they were heavily despised by the English educated elite class in the Kerala society by the close of the 19th century. There is one novel called Meenakshi. The 5th and 6th chapters of this novel describe how Mohiniyattam as a dance form was performed in the palatial bungalows of the feudal chieftains, and how it was despised by the people, the common people, in the society, and gives a very true picture of it. So, from this situation, the dancers withdrew, and the dancers whom Vallathol was able to find out after going to so many different places, they actually didn't know much of what they learned in their younger days. They had long forgotten. They forcibly forgot all the lessons they learned. Only a few of them could recollect some of the movements, maybe a couple of lines of the items they learned. And with this, a Mohiniyattam repertoire was created. Way back in 1935-40, and later on it was refurbished in 1957 or so. So it's little wonder, it's no wonder, Mohiniyattam, which was reinvented by Vallathol and nurtured by the dancers and a few Nattuvanas. There were a few Nattuvanas in Kerala, like Korattikara Krishna Panikar, who was one of the oldest gurus of Kalamandalam, who was the mentor of Kalamandalam, Kalyani Kuttiyamma, one of the illustrious dancers, Mohiniyattam dancers. This very term Nattuvana denotes its connection with the Nattuvanas in Bharatanatyam or in the Dasya. So, in all probability, the dancers trained by the Nattuvanas do have a very direct lenience towards Bharatanatyam. So the relationship between the newly founded Mohiniyattam and Bharatanatyam was not an accident. It was perhaps not voluntarily, but involuntarily at least, there was a sort of inspiration that led these Nattuvanas to introduce elements of Bharatanatyam into Mohiniyattam, so that the whole items were transplanted from Bharatanatyam to Mohiniyattam. Charkattu and Jatiswaram and Varnam and Padam and Tilana. So someone was just telling me last time when I had a talk at the Madras Music Academy that if you just go outside the theatre and listen to the music of a Mohiniyattam recital, then it sounds very much like Bharatanatyam. Because the music is highly classical, and the instruments used, mridangam, violin and flute and all these instruments also are the same as those used in Bharatanatyam. So what makes the difference in the music, in the percussion and vocal music of Mohiniyattam, so that we can say that this comes from Kerala? It's absolutely difficult. I'm not blaming any of the dancers, any of the great acharyas who contributed a lot in terms of specifying certain movements, certain movement dynamics of Mohiniyattam, certain expressional patterns exclusive to Mohiniyattam, centering on the rasa Shringara. Shringara in all its different manifestations, and the undulating body movements, the circular footsteps. These are all characteristics of Mohiniyattam that have been preserved. And we owe a great deal to those acharyas who did not completely forget or forgo these elements. Yet, to claim that Mohiniyattam is a dance form, is an exclusive Kerala heritage, you need to revolutionize the music of Mohiniyattam. The percussion music, the vocal music, and also the body kinetics of Mohiniyattam. And this was thought of by a couple of dancers, unfortunately not from Kerala, but from outside Kerala. These two dancers, one more of an academic like Dr. Kanakarle, and one is a dancer who has experience in Odissi too, Bharati Shivaji. These two dancers came forward to reinterpret the form and content of Mohiniyattam. To what extent you can agree with them is a different question. I'm just saying this movement came from them. And the result was obvious. The music, the vocal and percussion music, as well as the movement dynamics of Mohiniyattam, underwent a kind of radical transformation, I would say, to a considerable extent. With the result that Mohiniyattam became more dynamic, just from a general reading, I would say. It was stagnant for a long time, confined to the aesthetics, the limited repertoire, the movement vocabulary, which were preserved and promoted by Kerala Kalamandalam group of dances. And a few dances from Kalamandalam, like Kalamandalam Kshemavati, then Kalamandalam Sugandhi, and later Kalamandalam Leelama, they all tried to give new aesthetic dimensions to Mohiniyattam, mostly concentrating on the Abhinaya aspect of it. And with all these, you could see a whole gamut of emotions, movement culture began to dominate the Mohiniyattam scene. Yet, the question remains whether Mohiniyattam can claim the kind of aesthetic solidity and structural fineness which Bharatanatyam can claim, which Odissi can command. This is something the dancers of the day, the Mohiniyattam dancers of the day, still have to discuss and think about. For some reasons, I see that, of course, all the classical dance forms are undergoing transformations prompted by the effects of a postmodern globalized society. But still, there are some postulates, there are some basic fundamental elements which cannot be altered in a classical dance or theatre tradition. And when you compare this dance tradition to Kerala's highly developed dance drama tradition like Kathakali, or the intense theatre tradition like Kudiyattam, the traditional Sanskrit theatre, Mohiniyattam's foundations are, I doubt, a bit shaky. To reinforce the fundamentals of Mohiniyattam, you should have a multi-pronged approach. The dancers and perhaps the informed critics, the scholars, the aesthetes, they all have to come together to see whether Mohiniyattam can be given a structural solidity which can never be questioned or altered at any time or on any space. I think this is a question which all those who are committed to this dance tradition and the scholars and the aesthetics who are interested in this dance tradition have to immediately take up. But another question that comes up is the dilution of its external identity. I would say the aharya, the makeup and costuming, the kaishiki. See the simple, elegant makeup and dressing of Mohiniyattam. It is easily discernible. Wherever you see the facial makeup and costumes of Mohiniyattam, you can easily identify. But now, I find that all these dancers are using multicolor costumes, gaudy, unesthetic, and it belittles the status of the Kerala women altogether. I just have no idea why they are going in for this kind of a very colorful dressing culture for Mohiniyattam. Even without that, the simple, elegant facial makeup and costuming can give great impressions. And I've always thought, and I was corrected by my friend, I always thought that Mohiniyattam as a dance form is a lightweight compared to Bharatanatyam. But my friend who did a research on Mohiniyattam, and Justin Lemos from the University of California, Riverside, she corrected me. We did together for months or even for a year research on Mohiniyattam, and she convinced me that the soft, delicate, undulating body movements of Mohiniyattam are very difficult to execute compared to the sharp stamping and the sharp lines that are given by the Bharatanatyam dances, although it creates a much more greater impact on the audience than this underplayed Mohiniyattam. But to execute the movements of Mohiniyattam, to execute the expressions of Mohiniyattam with all its niceties is really a big challenge. And with all these resources in hand, how can we ourselves convince that this dance form does have the resources, the form and content to compete with, to stand on a par with the rest of the classical dances of India? I'm sure the dancers of the older generation and the younger generation, there are so many young dancers now coming and doing Mohiniyattam, not only from Kerala but from all the different states. I recently, just last week, went to Trivandrum and I watched a chain of recitals of Mohiniyattam lasting for half an hour for each young dancer. And one thing which I noticed and which I told also some of these dancers is that Mohiniyattam cannot center itself, cannot move around and hum around the slowest tempos alone. It should also shift its tempos whenever it's needed. I found it very disheartening when one or two of these dancers did the Tilana in a very slow tempo. Of course, if you would like to do a Tilana, you can do it. But why don't you raise the tempo a little more after a slow-paced Varnam and a slow-paced Abhinaya, Padam. When Tilana comes, that's also very slow. And it doesn't give you the sort of excitement which its other counterpart, Bharatanatyam, gives. Tilana should be a bit more racy. Its music, its syllables, and the footsteps and the footworks, they all have to be either third tempo or fourth tempo. Fourth tempo maybe you can forgo, but at least second and third tempos. These are some of the minute aspects that have to be looked into if you want to save Mohiniyattam from boredom. Otherwise, after an hour of watching Mohiniyattam, you'll be fed up. As a common spectator who does not have so much knowledge about all the intricacies of the dance form, I'll feel a bit bored. And I should also tell you on this occasion that I just don't find many Mohiniyattam dancers in Kerala whom I can identify with the great Padams or Varnams or Kirtanams of Savitarnal or Elementary. Because body is the vehicle of your expression. And the Angovanga Pratyangas, how are you using these? Whether you are making an effective use of your Angovanga Pratyangas. This is something the dancers have to think aloud, I think. I always remember with lots and lots of joy, whenever I hear Yenna Tavam Chevane, Pavanasam Shivan, in Kapirada, sung by anybody on any occasion, whether on the street or in a hall or outside, my mind is filled with the form and figure and expressions and movements of Malavika Saripkai. How come that? I've seen her maybe a dozen times doing this. And I found out that the lyrics is competing with the visual dynamics. The dance's language, it almost becomes akin to the music. And you can never differentiate between the music and the dance. And the dancer finally wins. And this kind of a situation, if you hear Sumasayika, then you should at least get an experience. You should at least have the image of a dancer coming into your mind. Of course, I do have one of our most favorite dancers, Shamavati, sitting here. I had that rare opportunity to see her perform that. Of course, that image comes to me. But I think more and more dancers should identify themselves with the great lyrics of Sadhu Tirunalari and Iraiman Thambi so that their face and their movements come to our mind whenever we listen to the music, even without the visuals. And that actually creates a strong sense of Mohiniyattam in the minds of the audience. And I'm sure the dancers, the young dancers of the day, and also those who belong to the older generation, they would think about codifying all what they have done and providing an aesthetic unity to the fundamentals of Mohiniyattam, which they inherited from their gurus and which they themselves innovated through their experience. A codification, a classification is absolutely necessary, which is obviously lacking in this dance tradition. I do have so many other impressions about it, but for the time being, I just conclude my talk highlighting some of these aspects, and I hope this and similar platforms will be there in future too, for the dancers to arrive at a broad consensus and also to bring this dance tradition forward without compromises, without vulgarities, without playing to the gallery, and without devilish consumerism. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.